Detective Callahan stood in the middle of the living room, his eyes scanning the scene before him. Marissa Worthington, the wife of the recently deceased billionaire, lay sprawled on the cold, marble floor. Her body, once elegant and graceful, was now lifeless, her eyes wide open as if frozen in terror. A pool of blood stained the floor beneath her, its dark crimson hue stark against the polished surface. A silver locket, engraved with her initials, lay just inches from her outstretched hand. The locket, once a symbol of love and devotion, now seemed like an ominous reminder of the secrets that had been buried for far too long. The air was thick with tension as the officers worked quietly, cataloging evidence and taking photographs. The room was meticulously clean with no signs of forced entry. The furniture was undisturbed, and yet, there was something unsettling about the calmness that enveloped the space. Callahan kneeled beside the body, his gloved hands carefully lifting the locket. He examined it for a moment before pocketing it. There was something off about this whole scene, something that didn't sit right with him. This wasn't just another domestic dispute gone wrong. No, this was something deeper, something more sinister. The husband, Thomas Worthington, had died just weeks earlier in a supposed heart attack. Their marriage, though, had been far from perfect. Rumors of infidelity, secrets, and financial troubles had followed them for years. But this wasn't just a grieving widow with a broken heart. Callahan could feel it in his gut. He stood up and walked over to the window, peering out at the sprawling estate that lay beyond. The lush garden, the expensive cars, the servants, the perfect life, all now tainted by the ugly truth that was hidden behind the walls of this mansion. Marissa Worthington had inherited everything, but was it all worth it? Was the life she had so carefully curated just a mask for something far darker? The sound of the police radio crackled in the background, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the crime scene again. There was a story to tell here, and it wasn't going to be easy to unravel. The investigation had just begun. Marissa Worthington had everything: luxury, status, and beauty. On the surface, her life appeared flawless, a picture of perfection that many envied. But beneath the designer clothes and lavish mansion lay a woman who had begun to feel the weight of an invisible, growing pressure. For years she had believed that her life was built on love and trust, but in the months leading up to her death, something had started to feel wrong. Her marriage to Thomas Worthington was the stuff of dreams for many. They were the power couple, the handsome billionaire tech mogul and his stunning wife, the one who could make headlines with a single smile. But as the years passed, cracks began to show. She had always known about his long hours at the office, his business trips that took him far from home. At first, she'd accepted it all with grace. He was a successful man after all. But soon, his absence became more noticeable, his lies more frequent. It started with small things. He would come home late, his tie loose, his clothes slightly disheveled. She had chalked it up to stress from work, but the inconsistencies grew too loud to ignore. The late-night phone calls, the sudden texts he would delete without a second thought, the way his eyes darted when she asked simple questions. Questions about his day, about his friends, about their future. One evening she decided to follow him. It was a moment of impulse, a gnawing feeling in her gut telling her that something wasn't right. She had never done anything like it before, but the thought of losing everything, her reputation, her wealth, her perfect life, was too much. She followed him down the winding roads of their quiet town, into a part of the city she had never seen before. The street was lined with old, crumbling buildings, far removed from the pristine world she had known. She parked her car and watched from a distance as Thomas entered a small, unmarked building, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. She waited for hours, unsure of what to do. The building remained quiet, a stark contrast to the restless questions swirling in her mind. She never saw him leave. And the next morning, he had returned home as if nothing had happened, offering her his usual smile, his usual charm, and not a word about the night before. That night had haunted her. For weeks, she couldn't shake the image of him walking into that building, the way his face had been etched with worry as he glanced around. She tried to confront him about it, but he always had an explanation, a reason that made her feel small for questioning him. He told her it was just work, that she was overthinking things. But she knew better. She had seen the truth in his eyes, his guilt. As the weeks turned into months, Marissa grew more isolated. Her suspicions gnawed at her, but she had no solid proof, no clear evidence of betrayal. She confided in a few close friends, but they always reassured her that her husband was devoted to her, that it was simply stress from his job. And so, she let herself believe it. She buried her fears beneath the layers of wealth and comfort, convincing herself that her love for him was enough to overcome anything. But then came the whispers. At a charity gala, a woman, elegant and poised, approached her with a smile that was far too knowing. She introduced herself as a longtime friend of Thomas, and her words, though polite, were edged with something more. She spoke of a trip Thomas had taken months ago, a trip that Marissa had never been told about. The way the woman casually mentioned his other interests, the places he'd gone and the people he'd met, made Marissa's blood run cold. Her suspicions, once vague, now felt like a concrete wall closing in around her. That night, as she lay in their bed, the quiet hum of the mansion felt suffocating. She could hear Thomas sleeping beside her, his steady breath a reminder of everything she had lost, and everything she still stood to lose. She turned on her side, staring out into the darkness, unable to shake the feeling that she was being swallowed by a truth she wasn't yet ready to face. There were secrets, and she knew that she was the last to know them. The next morning, Detective Callahan stood at the threshold of the Worthington mansion once more. The scene from the previous night, the blood, the body, the unsettling silence, had been seared into his mind. But now things were moving quickly. The media had already arrived, and the whispers about the wealthy widow's tragic death were spreading like wildfire. But Callahan wasn't concerned with the speculation. He was focused on the truth, and something told him that the truth was buried much deeper than anyone realized. His team had already scoured the mansion for evidence, but the investigation was far from straightforward. Marissa Worthington's death wasn't just a result of a simple fall or accident. It was calculated, deliberate. The lack of forced entry indicated that whoever did this was someone she knew, someone she trusted. As Callahan walked through the grand foyer, his mind raced. The house was a labyrinth of fine art, expensive furniture, and pristine marble floors. Everything had been carefully curated to create an image of perfect wealth, perfect happiness. But all of it felt hollow now, like an elaborate facade hiding something sinister. He made his way to Marissa's personal study, a cozy room with large windows that looked out over the estate. It was here that he found the first clue that raised his suspicions: a drawer left ajar with papers scattered carelessly inside. Normally, Marissa was meticulous, so why would she leave it in such a disorganized state? One document caught his eye: a receipt for a luxury car purchase, signed by Thomas Worthington, her late husband. But there was something odd about it. The date on the receipt was 2 days before Thomas's heart attack. The purchase of a car, an expensive model, seemed out of place, especially for a man who was supposedly in the final stages of illness. This was just the first puzzle piece. Callahan took the receipt and tucked it into his coat pocket, feeling the weight of it settle there. He knew this was just the beginning, there would be more, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all just skimming the surface of something much darker. "Detective," a voice called from behind him. It was Officer Martinez, his partner, holding a file in her hands. "What did you find?" Callahan asked, turning to face her. "Somebody's been busy," she replied, glancing down at the file. "We've traced some of the transactions from the Worthington account, and let's just say, they don't paint the picture of a man who was planning on dying anytime soon. His business dealings? They're messy. Very messy." Callahan's interest peaked. "How messy?" Martinez's expression hardened. "I'm talking blackmail, threats, and offshore accounts tied to illegal enterprises. The more we dig, the more we realize Thomas Worthington was living a double life. One of power, corruption, and criminal dealings. But here's the kicker. The accounts were all tied to Marissa." "Her?" Callahan muttered, taken aback. "She had no idea about any of this?" Martinez shook her head. "Doesn't seem like it, but it's strange. Why would she inherit everything, including all of Thomas's debts and criminal ties? Was she a victim or was she complicit?" Callahan was silent for a moment, processing the implications. Marissa's death wasn't just tragic, it was possibly the result of a legacy she never wanted to inherit. And now, with each piece of information coming to light, the truth seemed even more elusive. Before they could speak further, Callahan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number. "Detective Callahan," he answered, his voice steady. "Detective," a gruff voice on the other end said, "I have information that you might find interesting. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Avenue. Alone." The line went dead before Callahan could respond. His heart skipped a beat. Was this a lead? A warning? "I need to go," Callahan said, glancing at Martinez. "Stay here. Keep going through those records. I'll be back soon." As he left the mansion, the air felt heavier than before. With each step, he could feel the weight of the investigation pressing down on him. There were people involved in this that didn't want the truth to come out. And soon, Callahan would be caught in a deadly game where the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. Detective Callahan's footsteps echoed down the narrow, dimly lit hallway of the abandoned warehouse. The musty scent of decay and stale air clung to the walls, but he barely noticed. His mind was too preoccupied with the phone call, the mystery that had led him here. Who was this person? What did they know about Marissa Worthington's death? As he reached the back of the warehouse, he spotted a lone figure standing in the shadows. The man was tall, his features obscured by the darkness, but there was something familiar about his posture. The figure stepped forward and Callahan's instincts flared. It was a man from Marissa's past, another one of Thomas's associates, a name that kept popping up in the records, but someone who had avoided the spotlight. "You're brave to show up alone," the man said with a cold grin, his voice raspy, like a man who had been through far too much. "I'm here for answers," Callahan replied, his voice steady. "What do you know about the Worthington case?" The man chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You really think she didn't know? You think she was just some innocent bystander?" Callahan stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "I'm listening." "She was involved, detective," the man continued, stepping into the light. His face was marked with the hard edges of a life lived in the shadows, weathered and rough. She had the perfect life, didn't she? The perfect husband, the perfect wealth. But all of it came at a cost. Thomas wasn't who you thought he was. Callahan's heart raced, but he kept his face neutral. "What are you saying?" The man's lips curled into a sly grin. He was deep into something ugly, money laundering, underground dealings, and, well, murder. And Marissa? She knew. She just didn't know how deep she was in it until it was too late. For a long moment, Callahan said nothing. His mind was spinning, piecing together the fragmented truths he had uncovered so far. Marissa wasn't just a victim of her husband's criminal life. She was tied to it, whether she had realized it or not. "You think she was in on it?" Callahan asked, his voice low. The man nodded slowly. "I don't think, detective. I know. And if you dig any deeper, you'll find that her death was no accident. She knew something Thomas had worked hard to keep buried. And someone wasn't happy about it." Callahan felt a chill run through him. "Who?" The man hesitated, his gaze darting to the door as though he feared someone might be listening. "That's not something I can tell you. But be careful, there's a lot more at stake here than just her death. This is bigger than you think. You're not just dealing with a case of inheritance gone wrong. This is a war, detective. And Marissa, she was just a casualty." Before Callahan could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving him with more questions than answers. The truth was beginning to come into focus, but the more he uncovered, the darker and more dangerous it became. As he left the warehouse, Callahan felt the weight of the investigation pressing down on him. He had entered a world of secrets, betrayal, and deception, where nothing was as it seemed. He could feel the walls closing in around him. If he wasn't careful, he might just become the next casualty in this twisted game. As the days passed, Detective Callahan's investigation became more relentless. Each piece of evidence seemed to point in a new direction, each clue leading him deeper into the dark, hidden corners of Thomas Worthington's life. But it wasn't until he received an unexpected visit from Marissa's lawyer that the case took a turn toward the truly unsettling. "Detective, I think you need to see this," said Monica Reeves, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer in her early 50s. She was one of Marissa's closest confidants, and the one who had helped her navigate the complexities of Thomas's estate after his death. She handed Callahan a thick folder, its contents sealed in an envelope that had clearly been opened only recently. "What's this?" Callahan asked, taking the folder from her hands. Monica's eyes darted nervously. "It's something I found in Marissa's private files. I've been going through her documents to sort things out after her death, but this isn't something I can just ignore. It's too important." Callahan opened the folder and found a series of documents, financial records, bank statements, and legal papers, but it was a single letter at the end of the pile that caught his attention. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the content was chilling. The letter was addressed to Marissa from a person named Eli Murdoch, one of Thomas's former associates. The contents were brief but clear. "You know the truth, Marissa. I'm giving you one last chance to keep your silence. If you don't, I will expose everything, your husband's dealings, the murders, the lives he ruined. The choice is yours, but remember, silence keeps you alive. Speak, and you'll be just another victim in this twisted game." Callahan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The letter spoke of murders, deaths that had been tied to Thomas's secret criminal activities. And it wasn't just business deals or financial fraud. This was something far darker. He turned to Monica, his voice tight. What is this? Why didn't Marissa say anything about this? Monica swallowed hard. Marissa was terrified. She had her suspicions, but she didn't know the extent of Thomas's involvement in all of this until it was too late. She thought she could handle it, protect herself and her family, but whoever this Eli Murdoch is, he wasn't going to let her walk away. She must have been planning to confront him, but we never got the chance. Callahan looked down at the letter, the weight of its implications sinking in. Marissa had been in the middle of something much larger than he had realized. Thomas wasn't just a billionaire hiding his wealth, he was involved in organized crime, murder, and corruption. And now Marissa was dead, likely because she had learned too much. But what really struck Callahan was the final line in the letter. Silence keeps you alive. Marissa had tried to protect her family, but her inheritance, her trust in Thomas, had come with a deadly price. What happened to Eli Murdoch? Callahan asked, his voice cold and determined. He's been missing for weeks, Monica replied. But if I had to guess, he's still out there. And I'm afraid he's not the only one who knows the truth. As Callahan left the office, the puzzle pieces were beginning to fall into place. Marissa had inherited everything, wealth, power, and the sins of her late husband. But now that she was dead, the secrets Thomas had kept hidden for so long were coming to the surface, and they were darker than anyone had imagined. The more Callahan uncovered, the more the investigation felt like it was leading him down a path from which there was no return. Whoever was behind Marissa's death was still out there, pulling the strings, waiting for the next move. And soon, Callahan would realize that he was not just investigating a murder. He was uncovering a dangerous criminal empire. The investigation had reached its boiling point. Detective Callahan felt the weight of everything that had unfolded: Marissa's death, the lies, the murders, and the endless web of corruption. He was standing at the edge of a precipice, and he knew that with each step forward, there was no turning back. The final clue came when he received a tip about a hidden safe in the mansion, one that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. The caller had been anonymous, but the information felt too accurate to ignore. Callahan had no time to waste. He raced back to the mansion, his heart pounding in his chest. As he entered the study, the room that had once seemed so familiar now felt like a tomb. The safe was hidden behind a painting, an old ornate portrait of Thomas and Marissa, an image of a couple that seemed so perfect, so untouchable. Callahan carefully removed the painting, revealing the safe beneath. His hands were steady as he entered the combination, a series of numbers that had been scrawled on a torn piece of paper he'd found earlier in the investigation. The lock clicked open. Inside, the contents were a revelation. A set of financial records, including illegal transactions linked to Thomas's criminal empire, money laundering, bribery, and extortion. There were photographs of Marissa, but not the ones that the public had seen. These were disturbing: images of her standing with criminal figures, shadowy deals, and even a contract signed by both her and Thomas, detailing the arrangement of the illegal activities. But it was a small, crumpled letter at the bottom of the safe that truly shocked him. It was addressed to Marissa from none other than Eli Murdoch. The letter read, "You've been playing both sides, Marissa. I should have known you'd eventually turn on me. But don't think you can get away with it. When the time comes, the truth will come for you, and you'll regret ever crossing me. No one can leave this game unscathed." Callahan's mind raced. Marissa hadn't just been a victim. She had been entangled in the same web that had ensnared Thomas. She had been caught in a deadly game of betrayal, where trust was a currency that didn't exist. The truth was more complicated than he could have ever imagined. The final twist came when Callahan learned that Marissa's death was no accident. She had been murdered, but not by an outsider. The person who had killed her was someone who had been close to her. Someone who stood to gain everything from her silence. As the pieces clicked into place, Callahan realized that Marissa's husband's death was also a setup. Thomas's heart attack had been staged. He had been eliminated to cover up his involvement in the criminal empire. And Marissa, now the inheritor of everything, had become a liability. She knew too much, and in the end, someone close to her had decided that it was time to silence her. The investigation ended with a confrontation, a reckoning, that left Callahan with more questions than answers. But the truth had been exposed. The people behind the murder, people who had once been trusted, who had once smiled and sat at the table, were now revealed for who they truly were. As Callahan stood at the edge of the mansion, the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place, he couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The legacy of the Worthington family, built on lies, betrayal, and death, had finally been shattered. But the cost was high. In the end, justice had been served, but at what price?